And so they'll be available on the Chaffee Health website, which we will make sure that you all have that email address available to you, or not email address, I'm sorry, that website address available to you. Today, let's see, wait a sec. So this is the second in our virtual events, and we're hoping later to reconvene somewhere at a hot springs in the CMHC tradition, but we appreciate all of you joining us virtually for this summit. So thank you for that. I would like to offer public gratitude to the rest of the Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition Board. They've all been instrumental in putting the scope of the summit together. That includes Becky Gray, who's Executive Director of the Chaffee Housing Authority, Lisa Bloomquist Palmer of the Homes Fund out of Durango, Betsy Crum of the town of Snowmass Village, Reed McCullough of the Chaffee Housing Trust. Thanks to all of you for helping to make this work. So we're really looking forward to today's session. And just a little housekeeping, all of you will be muted. You do have an icon at the bottom of your screen that allows you to ask questions. So I think what we will do at this point is provide, I'm going to try and look at the questions as we go and make sure that I don't miss them. So bear with me on that. We're going to ask Lance Wendell, who is one of our panelists. Lance is from Ardmore, Oklahoma, and is the president and CEO of Lance Wendell Development, or LW Development. Lance is very experienced in affordable housing development throughout Colorado and Oklahoma, and is currently working on a project with the Housing Authority here in Gunnison for a 22 for sale townhome product that will be deed restricted up in the jurisdiction of Mount Crested Butte. So we're very excited to see that product finished, and we're hoping that neighborhood goes on live and online and occupied around Christmas or New Year's of this year. We also have Ted Leidy, who is the CEO of the Colorado Home Builders Association. We're very excited to have Ted with us today. Ted has knowledge and expertise in what the home builders across the state are facing, whether it is in the political arena or whether it is in the on-site arena of actual building construction, and some of the challenges and successes that home builders across the state have faced. So with that, I think we will jump into it. I'd like to ask both Lance and Ted to maybe give a little more introduction to themselves, and then we'll start with Lance. Ted then will follow, and Ted has a slideshow presentation with some information that I think you'll find extremely interesting and will certainly prompt our conversation from here on. So Lance, if you would like to start off.
Sure. Lance Wendell, I am from Oklahoma and specialize in workforce, affordable or low income housing. We use all those terms, and primarily really focus in rural Oklahoma. We're not a specialist in Colorado. We ventured into Colorado and we're learning a lot, both good and bad in mountain town workforce and affordable housing construction. But we do it all over Oklahoma. I didn't realize this, but we're working on 8 developments across 3 states right now. All kind of in the workforce, affordable housing, either open market for sale or open market for rent or subsidized for rent. And I even have a subsidized, the Colorado is a subsidized for sale project or development. And so this is kind of small town, traveling with my teams because we get to small town Colorado or small town Oklahoma, and there aren't teams there that can get the houses built. So we've designed ourselves to pick up and move and come to small town and build workforce affordable housing and then head off to the next small town. So that's kind of who I am and where my, expertise today stems from.
Thank you, Lance. Ted.
I'm Ted Leidy with, as you heard, the Colorado Association of Home Builders. We're the state trade association for the residential home building industry in Colorado, close to 2,000 members, all the way from Morgan and Weld County in the Northeast down to Cortez and La Plata in the Southwest, and pretty much all points in between. We represent from the production builder, national production builder, all the way down to the custom builder, the affordable housing, some affordable housing developers, and most of the trades and other attendant, members of the industry, whether they're attorneys, lenders, everybody in between. Been here since 2017 and was with the realtors for about a decade before that. So I've been doing Colorado real estate public policy and for quite some time, and love it.
Thank you. Thank you for your representation too. We appreciate it. So
you want me to begin?
Yes, if you would like to jump into your slideshow, that would be great.
Make sure you guys can see my screen. Jennifer, I'll go. If Jennifer says yes, then I'll just go.
Yes.
Well, thanks.
Okay.
I put this together. I've been doing similar presentations for other groups as well. Updated a few of these slides to be more appropriate for our charge today, but really thanks to Jennifer and Becky and the Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition for the opportunity to speak with you all today. But I want to talk about some it's not working, just a second. Okay. It won't change my screen. Just there we go. Give you an overview of kind of what the Colorado residential construction is, a lot of what our construction cost drivers or our challenges are today, and a little bit of what our public policy challenges are as well. This is our current market. I won't take you through all of these, but if you have time now or later, you can read through some of those. Obviously, the pandemic is still, overarching everything. The economic uncertainty that was when we were in the throes of it, that still exists today. We see that in mortgage forbearances. Will that be a possible spike in foreclosures? How do we manage expectations? We've got a lot of increased backlogs. We've got a lot of supply volatility in the supply arena. We'll talk a lot more about that, but it's also led to tight lot supplies, huge cost increases, market competition. I don't know that it's gotten greater. It depends on who you talk to in the industry probably, but then a ton of price appreciation, which I know everybody, especially in the mountains, is feeling right now. We do have a lot of things going for us. Some of it is the flip side to what I just talked about. But the record low interest rates is probably what's primarily keeping the demand where it is. If we see those rates start to creep up, we probably will see a little, a lessening in the marketplace. I wouldn't call it a chilling necessarily, but we won't certainly see the pace that we're seeing right now. We've got a lot of in-migration. I know you guys feel it in the mountain communities. Just read the Colorado Sun article about an hour ago that talked about that, the growth that the towns are experiencing up in our mountain areas. And not just in resort communities. But we've seen a big flight from the urban core that has put a lot of, not stress, but a lot of growth into our suburban areas, where our suburban areas already were growing. We've seen less demand for those urban core areas and a lot more demand in our suburban areas. People want to have a bigger home. They want to have a bigger lot. They know that they were spending, they just spent the last year plus at their home more than they've probably had in their lifetimes, and that's got people thinking differently about what they desire. In construction, we talk about the 4 L's, and I add a 5th L in there about local government, but land, lumber, labor, and loans, or capital, are our biggest cost drivers. On the government side, that's why I add local government in there. We have the land use, the entitlement process, the government exactions that you see, impact fees, tap fees, permits. All of those are creating challenges to our ability to meet demand and build more affordably. NHB does a construction cost survey every 2 years. In 19, it indicated it on average 61%, so up 5% from the last survey. The final sales price goes to construction costs. That's the vertical construction, 18% to the finished lot costs, and about 9% to builder profit. Obviously, that fluctuates from market to market, and those are national averages. This is an interesting slide, and you'll see the next one. They do, within the survey, they talk about the biggest cost challenges or just biggest challenges in the marketplace. And this is from 19 to 20. So what was the biggest challenge in 19? What's expected in 20? And you can see availability of lumber, building materials, cost of lots, all pretty high. So if you fast forward to this year, building materials, as you would suggest, as you've probably followed in the news, rose to the top, but you still see the cost of labor, the availability and time it takes to obtain building materials shot to the front too. You still see concerns about economic employment situations, cost of lots are all still pretty high. So not much has changed, except, as far as the top concerns, we've just reordered them at the top. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So land is one of our biggest cost drivers. Right now, land supply is very constrained in Colorado, whether you're on the Front Range or you're in the mountain communities or out on the West Slope. Our lot supply is probably less than 5 years now. A healthy lot supply is about 10. So we're seeing huge, and COVID, I think, put that really heightened those concerns, especially in El Paso County on the Front Range. We saw a lot of demand we didn't expect in the third and fourth quarter last year, and that took a lot of the lots we thought would still be available in 2021. What's the primary reason? We've got one, we're constrained by a lot of topography, as you well know, but we also have fewer land developers in Colorado than we did prior to the Great Recession. So we've got fewer entities preparing lots. Lumber, we can talk about it. I really want to hear from Lance on this as well as a practitioner, but lumber has skyrocketed. It's up over 300% from last spring. We are seeing some cause. I'll show a slide here in a minute for relief, or we're seeing some indication for relief. The futures on lumber are actually coming down from its stratospheric kind of apex, but it's still pricey and it's still adding to the cost. A couple months ago, even probably as much as May, we're adding about $36,000 to a cost of a home just on the lumber prices alone, and that's on an average size home. You can see the lumber kind of increase here from 356 right before or as the pandemic set in. It started to trough a little bit and has only really gone up. We found ourselves at $947 a board foot in February. But as you can see, it just continued to climb up and up and up, and went above $1,700. Well, the futures went about $1,700. The prices were somewhere between $1,500 and $1,600. But this is the good positive sign. We're seeing it come down. How long that will take for us to kind of see that, I don't know. Lance may have a better understanding of when we may see that on the job site. Labor, another huge cost driver. Our unemployment level, pre-COVID was about as low as you could get. Even now that our unemployment levels are coming down, we're still having trouble getting people into the skilled trades. The average of our skilled trades is in the 50s and growing. We've done a poor job replacing that labor at the lower end. We've got a lot of long-term efforts out there working with high schools and community colleges to try to grow that skilled labor, give people alternative means to a career, and showing them that it's great to kind of be your own boss in the skilled trades. But we are still facing a huge labor shortage, and that's something that's probably going to take some time to correct itself. A little bit more on labor. You can see in the Mountain West, 6% of builders believe the cost and availability of labor will still continue to be a significant problem throughout 2021. I think that you'll probably see similar figures in 2022, unfortunately. Capital, actually is probably the best in some regards. Again, we talked about low interest rates if you're a buyer. What is more expensive in a lot of places is the financing for land. Institutional lenders have been slow to come back into that market. We have a lot of land developers that if they're not heavily capitalized, they've got to use hard money lenders. That the hard money lenders have a greater interest rate. And that means when you tie that together with longer entitlement costs and carrying costs are that much greater, and that just makes the end product that much more expensive. But it's not the worst of the L's. This I know is Denver centric, but I just wanted to give you an illustration. In the kind of 8 to 10 metro area counties or Front Range counties that we saw, this is the 8-county metro area. As you see, annual starts was surpassed by annual closings. So it just gives you an indication that we did not help out the supply situation whatsoever. You can see condominiums and townhomes actually went down as far as starts and closings, which speaks to what I talked about earlier, kind of that flight from the urban core in the more suburban areas, wanting that single family detached home. Condominiums did not go down, but they didn't have the gains and continue the trajectory that they needed. The condominium, I think, is the most troubling part, and you've probably seen the mountain communities as well, but that's where we can get that entry level. Any sort of paired product or condominium product is where we're going to be able to help on the affordability range, I think, more so than in the single family detached market. So I hope this is a kind of a COVID blip, and we see a lot more in the attached product category continue to rise as we'd seen for the last several years. This I just kept on there as well. I did this for a Denver area, but I just wanted to say that the highest share that we saw at the end of 20 was in the $400,000 to $449,000 range. That's still expensive, but it's actually much greater, where we saw a greater concentration at 600 and above in the last several years. We are seeing a higher concentration now. We're seeing lot sizes being reduced and home sizes being reduced. And I think that's really the builder's attempt to meet that entry level marketplace, knowing that there is a big need out there. You're still getting a lot on the higher end, but you are seeing a bigger concentration at a more moderate price point. And then this I just kept on because you can see the spread between resale and new home construction has only gone down. Oh, sorry. We saw bigger spreads, 10 years ago, and that has just gone down to about 8%. That provides a lot more demand for new homes when you can buy a new home for just a little bit more than you can buy an existing home. I won't spend a lot of times here on this, but we had one of our data people, Zonda, put together these COVID scenarios, scenario 1 being the best. I won't go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but for those of you that are watching the recording, you can spend a little bit more time. I think, thank God, we're seeing scenario 1 play out. More so, we're seeing, more and more people vaccinated. We're seeing the economy open up again. Events are starting to happen. We've seen a couple rounds of stimulus now starting to hit the marketplace. COVID, scenario 2 just gets worse. And scenario 3 would be the worst case scenario. So if we saw the Denver market, and I think this still holds true wherever you are in Colorado, if scenario 1 were to play out, we probably see, it's still a strong backlog carrying out through 2021, hoping that it becomes a little steadier in 2022, and that we can get back to some kind of modicum of good housing starts at the end of 2022 into 2023. But if you note, 14,500 starts is what they're expecting, hopefully kind of into 2022. That's still just 75% of its peak in 2005. So that just speaks to how slow we were to meet demand coming out of the Great Recession, or how much more demand there actually was coming out of the Great Recession. I'll just speak a little bit on this because I want to hear more from Lance than from myself. But land use zoning, entitlements, permits, TAP and impact fees, they're all problems. They're problems. We hear about them from our members, no matter where they are in the state. So we need to do better. We need to work better with our local government partners to alleviate some of those concerns and some of the backlog that we're getting there. NHB does a cost of regulation study I think it's every 5 years. So you can see there, it's about a quarter of the price of a home can be attached to regulations at federal, state, and local levels. That number rises to almost a third for multifamily. So that's just something that we continue to work with our government partners to realize, hey, we need to we need to work better together. We need to have positive policies that are going to allow both market and below market affordable housing developers work to bring product faster online. Some other, very quickly, some other public policy challenges that we've had, construction litigation reform. We've seen that now in arbitration, where there's some that would like to get rid of arbitration as a means for dispute resolution. We think that arbitration is a key means to resolve disputes. The construction litigation environment we had for a long time in Colorado really stunted the growth of condominium construction when we needed that to really keep pace with demand and affordability. Immigration's always been a big issue. We talked about workforce development, impact fees, inclusionary zoning, water resources is a big thing. How do we work together to provide more, whether it's in-stream or off-stream water supply? And then a few of the solutions, and again, one of them is, and we were talking to our federal delegation in May, about increasing funding for our low-income housing tax credit, or the affordable housing tax credit, and really give Chaffee more tools, because their only problem there is they just don't have enough. They have more demand than they do, money to leverage the federal 9% with the state 4%, and I think you would see even bigger growth if we had more funding there. So I'm going to actually just stop there, and I'm going to let, I think, Lance do his, and then we can take questions from there. Let me stop this. Forgive me for going a little over.
Well, I don't have nearly as good a presentation as Ted, so I can speak to some of those issues. As a guy that kind of travels to work in the smaller towns, one of the things that we see, Ted, and not to throw Denver under the bus, but the problem is when Denver is booming, which it appears to be right now, it makes it a lot harder to get work done in the smaller towns, because that's where our workforce is going to come from, to be honest. I specialize in what I call a boom town. If you're not a boom town, you probably don't need me so much, right? If you're not a boom town, you can keep up with your own housing need. But as you become a boom town, like a lot of mountain towns seem to be, then you need more housing than what your locals can produce, which means you need to bring in outside labor. But if Denver's booming, that outside labor doesn't want to go. Why am I going to commute to work 4 hours to get to the Gunnison Valley when I've got all the work that I can stomach in the Denver metro area? And I see that right now. If I try to go work jobs outside of Oklahoma, or try to get a good framer to come up to Gunnison Valley, I'm having a really hard time, and not excited with what I'm doing in Gunnison right now, because my good framer said, we're not leaving Oklahoma. We didn't want to leave Dallas, but you got us to Oklahoma, but we're not going to go that far, right? And I try to incentivize them with money, but obviously that's in the negative direction of where I need to be to make affordable housing work. And so it becomes a big issue. And the point that I would say is, it is going to be tougher in mountain towns to build and produce workforce housing when the rest of the state is booming. The better times, unfortunately, it's not the time that we're in today. The better times is going to be when Denver is slowed down a little bit, and that framer is willing to stretch out and willing to commute to work, because he doesn't have as much work as he wants. And that is also true on the materials side. And so I'm not giving you good news and bright light at the end of the tunnel. When materials are tight, you can afford to increase costs better in your bigger metros than you can in your smaller towns. And so they can absorb that hit better than you can absorb that hit in the mountain towns. The mountain towns are paying kind of a double tax, because you get to the mountain town and you've got a lot more transportation costs to get your materials to the mountain town that you don't have in central hubs like Denver. So that's some doom and gloom that I'm bringing, which is it is a tough time right now, because we're all competing, and unfortunately the bigger towns, the Dallases and the Denvers and even the Oklahoma cities, can compete better at the limited resources, which are material and labor. And so it makes it very difficult to figure out how do you get those materials and labor into the mountain town. And so it's a big struggle. I would love to tell you that I've cracked the answer. I haven't. Logistically, we're figuring out how to get the materials there. It's tough, but we're figuring out how to do it. Labor, we are having an immense problem, just like everyone else. and it's multiplied when you ask them to drive 2, 3, 4 hours to get to the job site. And then I think, Jennifer, one of your questions is, even if we get them there, right, we can't, no one can commute 4 hours and get a good work day in. So we're going to have to house them, right, at the job site. And how do we do that, right? And we have different tricks that we've tried. Oklahoma being a very robust oil town or oil state, they're not unfamiliar with what's called a man camp, which is where you bring in these mobile housing units that the oil field runs, and you set them up. And some towns have seen that and have been friendly about that. Again, this is Oklahoma. I have not attempted this in Colorado, but some towns have helped put the man camp up. Generally, they do it outside the city limits or adjacent to the city limits, or someplace. But allow for that, and allow for, and it's not just the residential builders, but anyone that's bringing in a workforce to try to improve that mountain town can set up and use that little workforce housing camp that we've put up. We've done that. We've also gone and rented out kind of partial hotels and taken up a lot of rooms there. But we're in constant competition, with the other builders or the commercial guys that are coming into town, or anything else that's going on in town. So we're at a competition for that. One of the things that we've talked to towns about, and I think this could help in Mountain Town, is, there's always a hotel tax. We always see a hotel tax. If the town is really serious about, and we need workforce housing, can we get exemptions for workers on that on that hotel tax, right? They're not coming here on vacation. They're coming here to try to improve the town. And is there an exemption? And because you look at some of the towns and their housing, or their temporary housing tax, and it can get pretty substantial. And again, we're looking for everywhere that we can cut. Hey, is that one of the things that we can do to help house our workers so that we can import our workers so that they can develop the housing or the commercial construction or whatever it is that you're trying to develop in your town at the time. And these are kind of off the cuff, off the top of my head, things that we see for the problem. Another one, again, I'm not trying to talk about Oklahoma, where it's where I have the most experience. I know of a couple of entities in Oklahoma. One is a tribal nation that has received I'm going to call it an excessive amount of funds through COVID funding, whether it was from the original CARES Act or through the other things that come along. And they're sitting down, it's crazy, but they're sitting down in rooms trying to divvy up the multi-millions of dollars and where is it going to go? And I think if we're all going to talk about housing being one of our biggest, problems that we have, we've got to make sure we've got voices in the room when that money's getting divided up. At the state level, the Oklahoma legislature has recently put together a legislative task force, and it's $500 million to divvy up and how we're going to do it for the state. And you can't go, we're going to give it to Lance Wendell, he's going to go build some houses. That's not going to work. But what we can do, and it goes to what Ted talked about on land and lot cost, is when I go to a town and I've got to try to figure out, I want to bring workforce housing to I'll use Gunnison. I want to bring workforce housing to Gunnison, Colorado. The first thing I do is I pull up Google Earth and I start looking for dirt. Where can I put it? But the second thing that I have to do is I have to cross-reference, hopefully, the map that the city has of their sewer and water, and I have to cross-reference those two together, right? Because if there's not sewer and water within a mile, I can't play. It's not going to work. But bringing that sewer and water out there, I can't afford it. But if a municipality or somehow a housing authority to get on board with using funds, the amount of housing availability that you open up when you move a mile of sewer and water down a public road that never had it before, opens up land kind of on every side to be available for workforce and low income, but also median income housing, right? And so you get a lot of synergies off of it. The reality of median income housing, even though that's not necessarily what this group focuses on, but the reality is when somebody vacates a lesser expensive property to move into the new median income housing, we have put churn in the market and we've opened up housing, right? And so let's not look that off, that there's value, right? And I'm on y'all's side. I look at the McMansions too and go, oh yeah, we don't, that's too much. But for every McMansion, they're vacating a mid-priced home, and and whoever's moving up in a mid-priced home is vacating a lower-priced home. And so I've got to say that in our desperate need, all housing is good. And the fact that somebody tapped on to the mile worth of sewer and water that you brought in to build a 600,000, 700,000, yeah, that's still okay, because it also provided land opportunity for the 400,000 and even the $250,000 home, or for the LIHTC rental, right? Or what other kind of subsidized rental or non-subsidized open market rental that you might have. So those are kind of my current thoughts. That funding is out there. They're not necessarily talking about housing about it. And we don't have to talk about housing because they can't figure out how to get there, but we can sure talk about roads. We can talk about sewer, and we can talk about water. And moving a mile-long stretch of sewer and water in a town opens up development opportunities that have not been open ever, right? And that helps bring land costs down, because the other guy across town, who's the guy who says, I'm the only guy that's got sewer and water, can kind of charge what he wants to, right? But when you open up a whole other section line of availability, it makes his land a little bit more market rate. He has to actually now pay attention to the market a little bit better, and that helps. I'm not trying to not help that guy with his land pricing, but land pricing is one of our biggest driving factors. So how do we keep it within what should be the reasonable market for the town?
So you bring up a very good point, Lance, and that is the infrastructure. And if a developer does not have to include that infrastructure and the land cost into the cost of the development, then we can really get our housing prices to the target population that we're intending it to be, because it's not always low income housing. As you said, there's a missing middle, particularly here in Colorado. And there's a lot of money that is coming in at the state level, both from feds and from the state, that will be made available. And there is a lot of talk about directing that towards helping municipalities and local governments boost the infrastructure and create those infrastructure opportunities, so that land that could be available is now developable because of that, as far as the cost goes. For example, here in the city of Gunnison, just outside of the city limits, is about 35 acres of developable land. However, the infrastructure doesn't quite get there. And so if we could find a way, and hopefully this federal and state money is, as the legislatures say, it's really going to be available for local governments to take advantage of that and bring that infrastructure in, and then boost housing development that way. I am noticing that we have quite a few people who have come online as of 3:30 when this seminar or this workshop was advertised to start. So, Ted, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind, now that you've practiced your slideshow once, would you mind doing it again? It's got a ton of valuable information in it, and then I think it will really stimulate a lot of questions and conversation. And now that we have heard from Lance on how some of these things impact him as boots on the ground developing housing, I think we'll get into a really valuable discussion. So if you wouldn't mind.
I don't mind it. I do appreciate the practice. I can always use it. Let me pull. I forgot to do a few things to get it back into that mode. Just a second.
Okay. So for those of you that have recently joined us, this is our second in a summer-long virtual workshop series put on by Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition. Since we aren't planning to meet in person this year, hopefully we get back to doing that next year, where we'll meet somewhere where we're doing this live, and there's hot springs somewhere around us, as is our tradition. In the meantime, we have with us Lance Wendell, who is a developer out of Oklahoma and is foraging into the Colorado housing development atmosphere. And personally, here in Gunnison County, I'm very glad he is, because he's working on a project with one of my member jurisdictions. And then Ted Leidy, who is the CEO of the Colorado Association of Home Builders, who is going to give us a great slideshow that he's put together that kind of lays the foundation for the conversation we're going to have today about our housing challenges.
Can you see my screen again? Did that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody again. I want to just take you through several slides to kind of put a little more color into what you probably heard Lance talking about. But it's something that I've put together, done similar presentations on in the past and updated some slides for today's purposes, but just take you through kind of where our current housing market is in Colorado, where our current cost drivers are, which is I think what we're really talking about here, and kind of our public policy challenges as well that play into time and cost and our ability to meet market demand and build more affordably. So our current market, still heavily influenced by the pandemic and the pandemic unknowns. We've got a new variant out there. Will cases spike again? We still, that still has some economic uncertainty. We've got really good trend lines in the last few months. We're seeing our unemployment go down and some consumer confidence rise, but we had a lot of high unemployment, a lot of fragile consumer confidence before. We've got mortgage forbearances. Will that create a spike in foreclosures? We've got customer backlogs. We've got volatility in our supply and our labor, our material supply and our labor. We've got a lot of cost volatility as well. So our price appreciation is going up and up. We're seeing that whether you're on the Front Range, the West Slope, or in the mountains. Our tight lot supplies is something we'll talk a little bit more about as well as we go through these slides, and then increased entitlement timelines for local governments. We have a lot going for us too. I think it's driven mostly by low interest rates. On the building side, it's the low resale market obviously adds a lot more demand. From a full housing spectrum kind of housing market, it's not a great sign because we've seen fewer and fewer homes on the resale market than we have ever had. And that speaks to a lot of, I think people are staying in place. We've got a lot of in-migration still, a lot coming from the coasts and from the Midwest, even a lot from Texas. There was obviously a lot of pent-up demand even before COVID, and we saw a lot more demand in the third and fourth quarters than we ever thought we would in 2020. The other big thing we're seeing is a flight from the urban core into suburban areas, but I know we're also seeing that in spades up into the mountain communities. I'd read an article today from the Colorado Sun talking about that very matter. In construction, we have the 4 L's, and I've added a 5th, but land, lumber, or materials, and labor, loans, or capital, and local government. Those are all the challenges that we have in a good market, in a bad market. They're all, well, the first 4 especially are huge impediments, huge challenges right now. In the local government realm, we've got, land use zoning entitlement process, as I talked about, impact fees, tap fees, permitting times and fees going up that make the ultimate cost of housing that much greater. NHB does a cost survey every 2 years. You can see from 2019, I don't have the 2021 yet, but on average, 61% of the final sales price goes to construction cost, 18% to finished lot costs, somewhere around 9% for build or profit. This does fluctuate depending on your geography, where you are, what market you're in. I like to share this slide in the next to talk about, shows kind of the biggest challenges to builders in the marketplace. So this is the first slide. What were the big challenges in 19 and into 2020? You see labor, building material prices, cost of lots, or the availability of lots, all at the top. If you fast forward to this year, you see building materials shoot straight up. Also the availability of those materials shot to the top. Labor, still the cost and availability of labor is still high, where that was number 1 a year ago, is still up there. And other concerns as well, the developed lots still at the top. So land, again, 18.5%. You probably heard Lance talk a little bit about land and what are the challenges there with the infrastructure. We are just an undersupplied market wherever you are in Colorado. We feel it a lot on the Front Range, as you can imagine. We're about less than 5 years of supply of land and a healthy market somewhere around 10. So we're half is where we need to be. And that is constrained. We lost a lot of land developers in the Great Recession. So we've had fewer developers coming out preparing lots. We've seen a lot of builders or those that are more heavily capitalized become their own land developers as well. Lumber up 300% since last spring. The average NHB pegs that cost for the average new single family home to be about $36,000 increase just on lumber alone. We are seeing lumber come down from their highs. This is how lumber looked right before or as the pandemic was beginning in the United States. This is where we got to in February. And this is where beyond February, so this is February where I showed on the last slide to where we were at the middle of last month. Sorry, that's the price. These are the futures on the red line. The good promising sign is we're seeing the futures go down. I don't know how long it will be until we kind of realize those savings at the job site. It will take a little while, but it is a positive sign to see that going down. Unfortunately, that's also kind of paired a little bit with builder confidence going down. Prices are so high, we are seeing a little lessening of demand. Labor, huge. Lance talked about this a little bit in how he's got a really good business model and takes care of his labor force, and they stay with him. And I can tell you that's if you're a builder that knows the labor market, that's what you're trying to do in spades. Pay your teams more, get them to travel more. In Lance's case, if you can, to job sites, but 21% of the cost of construction is probably greater now, goes into labor. And Colorado has, much like the Mountain West, I'll show a stat here in a minute, a huge labor issue. The average age of our skilled trades is well into the 50s now. We've done a poor job at replacing that labor with the younger demographics. We're doing some things like careers in construction in Colorado to try to get more kids interested, get them coming out of high school at pre-apprenticeship programs and certifications, and show them other pathways to success in their careers. But those are much longer term solutions than we have the immediate need right now. Again, here's what I alluded to in the Mountain West region, of which we're in. 76% of builders believe the cost and availability of labor will continue to be a significant problem. I think, unfortunately, we're going to see similar figures into 2022 and beyond. Capital or loans. We talked about the lower interest rates from the buyer's side. That's probably continued to drive demand. Where capital's been an issue is more on the financing of land. Hard money lenders have replaced the institutional lenders. They come at a higher cost, a higher interest rate. When we see higher carrying costs because of longer permitting and entitlement times, to get from conceptual site plan to finished product, that all raises the cost of housing in the end. This is in the 8 metro area. Denver 8 county metro area, but I just wanted to illustrate, we ended 2022 here with more closings than we did starts. So we did nothing in 2020 in the 8 county metro area. And I think that's well beyond the metro area to help our supply problem out in Colorado. This one I wanted to show, again, it's the metro area, but it's showing a greater concentration, just a little, by a hair, in the 449,000 market or price point, where a few years ago you saw a greater share in that 600 and above. I really think, as we see home sizes and lot sizes coming down, that is the industry's way of trying to meet that demand at the entry level. And then the spread, we've seen the spread in the last decade just continue to go down between existing product and new product, the cost for each. So the cost right now for, the average cost or median cost, for an existing home, $491,000, for a new built, $531,000. That spread of 8% makes kind of that new home much more desirable. These are some scenarios that one of our data partners, Zonda, put together based on COVID. I'm not going to go through all 3 of them. It's better good and worse. This is kind of what we're seeing, I think, even statewide. There's a few areas that don't have their vaccination rates in a really good spot, but we are seeing the economy reopen, events happening, the federal stimulus, the two federal stimulus that we've had come through. We talked about that. Lance talked about that, and so did Jennifer. We will have a task force in Colorado as well. The Colorado legislature will to spend some of the stimulus money on housing as well. So please be engaged there. But we are seeing COVID scenario one, thankfully, bear itself out right now. Again, two gets just kind of worse, and three is the worst case scenario. If you see what we're seeing kind of play out, if it continues on this trend line, we should see steadier growth. There will continue to be backlogs through 2021, hopefully a steadier year in 2022. And then if all goes well by the end of 2022, we should be back to around 15,000 starts. But if you look at that in historical context, it's only 75% of where we were at the peak in 2005. I'm going to spend a little less time there unless people have questions. We can talk about that with the balance of the time, but I alluded to it already. Land use zoning are big concerns. We've seen a big growth in NIMBYism in Colorado, mostly probably in the urban areas, but I think you're probably seeing it everywhere. Lance and I talked about earlier, the low-income housing tax credit is now being called the affordable housing tax credit. And that is largely as a result and or a response to kind of destigmatize what shouldn't never be stigmatized, below market, whatever you want to call it, housing. Entitlement lot times frames have just continued to get worse and worse. Permitting fees and times, inspection times have only been greater. COVID obviously heightened that a little bit. NHB does a regulatory study about every 5 years. You can see about a quarter of the price of a home can be pegged to regulations. And that's at federal all the way down to local level. That number that percentage rises to almost a third at multifamily, which is really where you're going to get your supply. Some of the other construction challenges or policy challenges we've had in the construction industry, construction litigation reform for a long time, that is now being borne out in arbitration as a means for dispute resolution. But that was a big reason why we couldn't keep up with the demand we saw coming out of the recession, because no one would build for sale condominium product because they were probably going to get sued if they did. Immigration, workforce development kind of go hand in hand. We're seeing more inclusionary zoning ordinances come through. We're seeing some limited growth, housing growth initiatives that just recently passed in Lakewood. Hopefully they don't go beyond Lakewood, Golden, and Boulder because they'll just add to the cost of housing. LIHTC increasing, what are some of the solutions? Pass meaningful immigration reform that helps with workforce issues now. Promote sound use in metro districts. That's back to kind of what we spoke about for the huge cost to extend infrastructure, sewer, water to raw dirt, low income housing tax credit. The more we can do there to fund that program, the more Chaffee and more that you all in this universe can do to bring more product online. I'm going to end there and let you take it back over, Jennifer, and hear what our audience wants to talk about.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you going back through that, Ted. I think I could see it maybe 6 or 7 more times just to try and absorb what that really means to all of us. Not to understand it, but that there's so much meaning in each one of those bits of information that you presented. We do have a couple questions in the chat right now, and I encourage everybody to use the chat if you have questions. We don't have a raise your hand feature on the webinar, so please put them into the chat. We have a question of what policies can local governments put in place to encourage production of more of the missing middle housing and less remodels of $1 million second homes. And I'd like to maybe expand that just a little bit, because I think you touched on some of that, Ted and Lance, but if you could touch on that again. I forgot what I was going to say, so I'm going to let the two of you tackle that question. You should be able to see it in the chat if you need a refresher on what Lisa brought to us.
I've got it up in the chat, and I can give you some examples of of what towns have done that have encouraged me, right? I mean, I get called from economic development folks mainly, right? But sometimes directly from the towns. And I have seen everywhere from we will pay you $12,000 a house for every house that you build within this square footage and price range. And in Oklahoma, 12,000 is about like 36,000 in Colorado when it comes to house prices. That was, substantial. I've seen we'll give you the land. I've seen we'll give you the lots. Sometimes it's raw land. Sometimes it's lots that already has the infrastructure on it. I've seen, and this is an interesting one to take note of because a lot of municipalities come back and legally say, we can't give a builder X for doing something. And it's true. And so the crafty municipalities have come back and said, we can't, but our public works authority that is its own entity can, right? And so they used they used where the city kind of owned the sewer and water department. And sometimes, that's not always true, but in this case where the public works, sewer and water was its own entity. And so they said, look, you're going to be spending water meters and buying water, or that city sold the gas, right? Because we sell the gas, we'll give you a rebate for every gas meter that you spend as a way of getting money to the builder, right? And then, again, they put me in a box. Not, you got to build this size, you got to sell it for this price, or you've got to build this size and rent it for this price. So those have attracted me. The very first deal that got me into affordable housing in my local small hometown, that economic development director was a genius. He had some leftover land from a commercial project that they built. He didn't care about housing except he knew it was a problem. And they did an industry area, and they had some leftover dirt in the back. And he came in and got either a grant or a loan to develop those lots. And then he came out and he sold those lots to builders that would build within the box, whatever his box was, at a very, very subsidized price. I still remember today, I ended up paying $10,000 a lot for those lots that were probably worth $25,000, right? And he took the hit on it, but his theory was, I'm gonna do is to prime the pump and get you to come in and build these. And we did. I built the first 10 and it was a big deal for me. I thought that was great and was successful. And so he came back, I came back and said, good, do some more. And he said, no, I'll give you the land, you do the rest. But it primed the pump and it got me going, and it got me to where we're producing 500 a day, starting off that first 10. And so that was a really good incentive that I saw from the city was they took the hit on subsidizing the lots. Another one that I don't see as much, tap fees and impact fees, and especially in Colorado, they're higher than I've ever seen. And it's interesting when you look, and I'm gonna roll this into the next question. I'm looking at my screen where it talks about, hey, man, the builders are building 1800s and we need 1400s or 1300s. And understand from the builder's perspective, my tap fees and impact fees and permitting fees and just the cost of getting a lot of stuff there is the same if I'm building a 1300 as if I'm building an 1800, because when I build an 1800 3.2, it's got the same amount of kitchens and bathrooms as a 1300 3.2. And let's talk about where my money is in a house. It's in the kitchens and the bathrooms. That extra square footage that I might be charging, I'll use Colorado numbers for, I might be charging $200 per square foot. And let's be honest, that's what appraisers and realtors are having me sell at, is I'm going to sell by the square foot. So if I'm selling a $200 per square foot home, and it's got an extra 500 square foot that's nothing but open space in the living rooms and the bedrooms, that square footage costs me a lot less than the square footage in the bathrooms and the kitchens. But in 1800 3.2, I have the exact same bathrooms and kitchens as I do in a 1300 3.2. And so this is a driver for me. And part of that is what I'm going to call my fixed costs: tap fees, permit fees, right? Even fees to the utility companies, right? And then just kind of like some mobilization fees of getting my guys there, right? That's going to be the same whether I'm building 13s or 18s. And so that, how do you get them to incentivize it? Well, maybe it's we look at, some kind of regressive fee charge that comes back, right? And if you will build down at this smaller price point, we're gonna make it worth your while in fees and permit fees and tap fees, and we're gonna help get that burden off of your back of building smaller square footage. Jennifer, you're muted.
Which is sometimes the best. Sorry. Thank you, Lance. I appreciate your answer on that. And I think that's a very valid question, and an interesting point that you make is about the kitchens and the bathrooms. And I've also heard the same thing about garages. People say, well, a garage shouldn't cost that much because it's not necessarily finished space, but it's space that still has to have all of the same outside materials that the rest of the house does. You still have to have the outside of the house. You still have to have the same building envelope. And so we, particularly in the mountain regions of Colorado, love to have garages so that we can store, mostly for storage, for all of our tools, but also because it adds value and desirability to our homes. We have another question. What is the impact of second homeowners on the market? Ted, that might be something that you can address. I think anecdotally, we all know that second homeowners seem to have a big impact on our market and taking away land and space and materials and labor for construction. Lance kind of touched on this before, but maybe Ted, if you could address that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conundrum, right? I owned property and spent time in the Gunnison Valley, more toward Crested Butte, and I lived in Summit County. And a lot of us don't exist up there without that second home market, right? And those that come and bring their dollars and recreate up there. But it does obviously put pressure when there is limited land supply on housing prices. So I don't know what the impact is. I know that it certainly will raise the cost of rents. Again, I alluded to that Colorado Sun article that talked about that, right? The pandemic saw a lot of not just the short-term renters and not just people buying up second homes, but that middle market, or that people staying between a month and a year that were just renting homes for, maybe 6 months, 8 months. And that was taking up homes that likely would have gone to residents, or that's the thinking there. I don't have any sort of hard data or empirical data to tell you what the impact of second home owners of the second home market up there has done to actually raise the price. So I can't answer that definitively, but it's something that we've had to coexist for a long time together in the mountain communities, especially those that are resort communities. I wish I had a better answer. You're still muted.
Sorry about that. I'm going to throw this out there to the attendees as well as the panelists. Having worked in both Summit County and now in Gunnison County in affordable housing, they're both very heavy on second homeowners, short-term rentals. I think we all recognize that we would not exist as communities and economic drivers if we didn't have that economic driver, I should say. So we have to face it. Second homes, recreation, tourism, which drives short-term rentals. We can't live without them. We want to find a good way to live with them. And I think our best policy is how to manage them appropriately. And for all of you CMH people out there, you can throw sticks at me when we get together next for saying that, but I really believe that's true. And also, just to kind of put that point home, I am never going to advocate for a jurisdiction in Gunnison County to build affordable housing development way up on the side of a mountain where those multi-million-dollar homes are going. That is all by itself, where there's no transportation, there are no services. That is not where we put them. So if the land is going to be developed, okay, let's go for the second homes up there. And then as Lance said, they free up the middle homes that are maybe located down in town, and those free up homes that are affordable to our local wages. I'll get off that soapbox and I will move to another question that we had, which was what's your best prognosis for building materials pricing for the rest of the year? All other factors being equal, would you advise proceeding to vertical construction from here on out through 2022?
What the expert thinks on that one.
All right, so I took my crystal ball out and I was looking at it. We do. I didn't mention it earlier, but because of the way we're so spread out, we vertically integrated and have formed our own building materials company. And I have a lady on my team that does nothing but buy lumber all day long. And so she watches it all day long, and she kind of keeps me updated every 2 or 3 days. And her theory and what she's seeing and thinking is that we are in a really good dip right now, and we're excited that we're in a dip, and it is the time to buy, because what's happened is a lot of projects have gone on hold. A lot of people, especially Class A high-end apartment complexes, when lumber shot where it did, they don't pencil anymore. And the rising cost of homes have slowed down the production builders. So everyone's kind of slowed down, and people have put some projects on hold, waiting for what is happening to us today, which is, look, the dip is here, we're in the bottom. And so the concern is that literally over the next 2 or 3 weeks, deals that had come off the table are going to flood back into the market and are going to turn the price back up again, right? Let's say post 4th of July. And it'll be it's going to be an artificial bump, right? But it's going to bump because a lot of big projects that went on hold because of lumber pricing are going to come back and try to buy right now, and kind of artificially push demand back up. And then after that, it's not going to dive again. And this is, again, a crystal ball. This is just what we think we see. It's going to slowly tail off through the end of the year and probably into the end of first quarter. Guessing, you can quote me if you want to, but it's not worth anything, that we're going to settle in pricing in the 600 to 700 per 1,000 board feet. What does that mean if you don't track wood? 18 months ago, we were 350 per 1,000. 3 weeks ago, we were 1,400 per 1,000. And this is all what's called spot pricing. If you bought the wood today, we don't deal in futures. We just buy it today. So we were at 350. 3 weeks ago, we were at 14. Today, I think we're like at 11, maybe 1,000. I think in the end, it's going to settle out in the 600 to 700. And this is not because I'm smart. This is just because I read a bunch of articles, and that's what the smart people are saying. But I think that's the prognosis. So the question is, should we start vertical today? If you're going to have some foundation lag, and you're not going to really be purchasing lumber for another 90 days, I would. Probably the longer you wait, the more it's going to stabilize out. And this is just my opinion. That's not worth a ton. But you also, the longer you push it, the less you have housing. And so at some point in time, you have to pull the trigger and you have to go to work. I would probably not be buying today, because I think by the time you started to get it bought, you're going to be back in the post 4th of July bump, which is everybody else coming back into the market. I would let that settle out for another 60 to 90 days. And then I think you're going to be at a stable mark in lumber pricing.
Yep. Can't disagree with anything Lance just said. So. Yeah.
And that does create a challenge for mountain communities because our building season is so short. So, when do you pull the trigger? And as Lance, you experienced up there in Mount Crested Butte, you pull the trigger, so you get your foundations in, and then you've got to stop while we wait for 400 inches of snow or more to go by, and then you can start again. And what has gone on in the materials market at that time. There is some discussion on the chat about second homes and taxing, and I'm going to leave all that there because this is really not a session about that. Plus, we could talk until 2023 about those issues. So I think we'll leave those there, but I appreciate everybody putting their thoughts in there. And so we do have, let me look at some of these other comments in here and questions. There is one, what innovations in building are exciting to you? Are you seeing changes from traditional stick-built construction that are likely to take off? Great question, Lisa. So, Lance.
Yes, I am currently working on a solution. But that I think, and I say that because 3.5 years ago at the big national builder show, there was a company out there called Katera. And what those guys are you familiar with Katera? I'm going to tell my version of their story. They got me interested. I saw their booth and said, wow, this is genius. The way I understand Katera is they were Silicon Valley guys that said, you construction guys don't know what you're doing. You're using the same tools that you've been using for 90 years, and you're doing the same way you've been doing it for 90 years. Y'all are crazy. We're going to fix it because we're smart computer guys. And so they are throwing an exceptional amount of money at tech. right? At computer design and at innovation and at, machinery to be able to produce finished walls in the factory. I think that's a genius idea. I'm trying to do that same thing back in Oklahoma, not in Colorado, but I'm doing it very, very low tech. I'm just trying to bring my workers inside and put them under a roof and produce that same finished wall and be able to ship it out. And from a workforce perspective, I'm doing it. I just landed a really giant, what I call the giant bond deal. It's bond financing, tax and bond financing with LIHTC on the backside. And it's 301 units, a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, single family home. And what we just moved to make this work is actually what my lead ops guy came and said, what if every 3-bedroom home was the exact same floor plan? And I said, I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm doing that. I know what base housing is, and we're not building base housing, not going to happen. And he said, but we can change up all the elevations and we can make them look different. And I pushed back for a while. And then my property management team came on board and said, we love it because we hate from a property management perspective. Oh, how come Jeannie's got that unit and we've got the bad unit, right? Well, no, they're both 1,400 square foot units, but one's better than the other. And so we've got on board with it. And what it's allowing us to do is get very, very modular in the construction of this floor plan. And we think we're going to start building that in a factory and ship those walls out. And I can't, but there's a class that can be taught, a half-day seminar that can be taught on the economies of building that and shipping it out as a pre-built wall. People are doing panelized walls right now, and those that are doing it swear by it. I think it's doing very well. I think that kind of technology, Katerra has the lead, and they're putting a ton of money into it, but they're really not focusing on single family home. They're doing mainly apartment complexes, kind of where they try to go, and then some hospitality building. But I think there are a lot of people, 3D printing, right, is really coming along, and people are talking about, there's a group down in Austin that's doing concrete 3D printing, and it's not here yet, but I think that that's coming too. So I think the answer is there are a lot of people working on that solution, on technology solution to, like, we're framing it just like we did back in 1920. I mean, other than we plugged the saw in now. Used to, we had to use the hand saw, and now we plug the saw in, but everything else is just like we were doing 100 years ago. There is nothing in the United States that we do like we did 100 years ago, except for building a house.
Yeah.
Ted, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would, as Lance said, right, we're been a very traditional low tech industry. We've done it, it's a very labor intensive industry, and we've done things the same way for a long time. And it is interesting, it's exciting to see some of this tech or innovation really in the marketplace. The 3D printer is probably still new to say it's the panacea, but it provides a lot of promise, right? They, as far as bringing the cost of construction down and the pace of construction up. So the guy in Austin, I think there's a guy out in I don't know, Eastern California that are building communities, 3D printing with concrete. You're seeing more concrete. I've had the ready mix concrete people call me up and say, hey, are you guys ready to start building the concrete again? Because lumber's up so much. That's not as much of innovation as just more of a, market, a pivot in the marketplace to I can't talk right now, but we are seeing a lot more modular panelization and offsite, building and bringing that in. And I think you're going to only see more and more of that because that does innovate, speed up the process. So, as far as that goes, I don't know if Lisa's got anything else in mind with the innovations, but those are, I don't think I can think of any that Lance didn't already mention. And it's all promising. I think they're still pretty new, but that was what, part of our labor challenges have been it's a labor intensive, specialized labor process. And we have not had a lot of tech or efficiencies in the marketplace in a long, long time, but we're starting to get there. While I'm talking, I don't want to, unless you've got another question right on this, I want to go back to Lisa's first, because I think it addresses at least in part the second home question. And it's really just more the supply and availability and how do we bring more supply in the marketplace with or without a second home market. And I know Lisa knows about this, and hi, Lisa, 1271 that was passed this year, the realtors and Habitat for Colorado Habitat for Humanity Colorado really led the fight. We were happy to be part of the coalition, but it provides a menu of options to local governments. And it will be housed in the division of, the fund will be housed in the division of housing at the state, and allows local governments to go in there and explore ways to be innovative, to put more market or put product on into the market a lot faster, and will help. I think really it's designed to help more on the affordable the end. And I won't recite for you all of the tools that it mentions, but a lot of it we've talked about today. And you guys, I think it's incumbent upon anybody in the housing industry to say, all right, we've got this new tool, or we have the ability now to go get funds to explore new ways to meet the market demand right now. City Council, County Commission, let's do this. We're here to help you there. And we can gain funding for this and really see what works. And to me, those are all positive ways to put more supply online and do it at a cheaper rate, well, less expensive rate. So anyway, sorry, I just wanted to, before I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, and thank you for that. So it sounds to me like with these innovations in bringing building inside and then shipping it somewhere, as well as looking at more of the what you had just talked about, Ted, increasing the innovative technologies that we're using, that's going to address then some of the land and labor, or not land, but labor and lumber, those two of those 4 L's that you were talking about, and maybe help address some of the cost drivers. So, but a question I have here is, we're 250 miles away from Denver in Gunnison. Durango is further. Steamboat's a long ways away, and you have to go over mountain passes to get to us. So what does that do? You may have a lower cost of production for your housing parts, but what does the shipping and the transportation do to that cost?
Lance talked about it earlier. I'm going to defer to you again. It's
a math problem, right? I mean, it is a math problem. I will tell you that this is my vision, right? Maybe my kids will accomplish it one day. I don't know that I will. But to develop this factory that can produce walls and not modular boxes, and this is just me and my look at it. The problem with modular boxes is one, shipping air, and 2, getting it over a mountain pass, right? Getting a 14 or 16 foot wide house that's got all that freeboard and mountain winds, that's a bad idea. My answer is the individual wall sections and individual ceiling sections and individual roof sections that can stack. And so you're not shipping that air, and you can ship them on a truck that's not super over width, right? But you're right. The transportation cost of, I will tell you right now, Ardmore, Oklahoma to Gunnison, Colorado is costing me $3,200 a truck, right? That's what I'm paying. And I know, because I'm going to send a bunch of trucks there. And that does, that's expensive. That being said, what if I could get that house on 2 trucks? $7,000, $8,000, call it 10, right? $10,000 against the cost of a home that's selling up there for $300,000 or even $250,000. That's pretty nominal, right? I probably have that in the hotel rooms for the guys that I'm, putting up there because they're living in Gunnison, while they're building. And so the transportation is a cost. But when I decided to come to Mount Crestview, that was the math I did: is how many trucks does it take me to move 2 houses if I build it there? And my answer was, it's about 2 full semi-truck loads to get all my materials to build 1 house there. And I did that and said, okay, $10,000 in transportation costs. I'm not knocking the local suppliers, but I can now go price the local supplier and see if it's worth it to me to buy it off of him local. If it's less than my transportation cost, absolutely love to buy local. But if it's not, and often it's not, then my answer from a logistics perspective has to be, I can buy all that with my wholesale purchaser in Oklahoma, and I can ship it up. Or I can do the hybrid, because I've got a big job going on in the Oklahoma panhandle right now, because I'm in Oklahoma, where I happen to have a rail access. I can rail it to Gunnison. I can offload it there and truck it up, right? And we've done some of that. But again, that my logistics is a little bit different than probably most of the local builders. But there are solutions that you can look at from a logistics perspective about how do you do this, and how do you shave costs everywhere you can. And not only am I shaving costs, but I mean, I'm saving diesel, right? I'm saving road traffic. I'm saving liability on the road. It makes sense.
Right, and also increasing the ability to put housing on the ground for us.
And this, whether you're doing the bare minimum panelized walls that kind of is what's going on in Denver, or if you're doing the Katera model where the wall's painted with the light switch already in it, right? You're speeding up the construction time. And in a mountain town that I'm not used to, that you can build from this month to this month and don't try anything else, that's a big deal, right? So yeah, I think that the more you can go off-site and ship it in, yeah, it's going to cost you money in transportation. But I think it's going to save you in mobilization and logistics of being there, and it's going to save you in time, and time is really important in high elevation towns.
I'm going to refer to another L that Ted talked about, and that was labor. And I have a question. One, first of all, you're seeing a significant shortage of skilled labor in building housing, partly, I guess, because we're doing it the same way we did 100 years ago. Secondly, because the trades may not be considered an attractive occupation to have. But it seems to me that the trades can command some pretty good wages. Are they paying sustainable wages? And is that something that should, along with promoting them and bringing in more education for the trades, you know, VOTEC schools would be awesome to have more of those, but are the wages that we're paying to laborers, are they sustainable wages?
And that's depends on where you are, right? What your cost of living is. But yeah, I mean, our average wages in the construction industry are well above median or average prices. And it depends on what you're doing, right? Are you on a framing crew, or are you, you know, the mill work, you know, are you the carpenter, you know, are you, what are you doing on the job site? But yes, I mean, you can command a lot more than you could, you know, even 2 or 3 years ago in today's market for being even just a labor without much skilled, you know, being a skilled labor, but skilled laborers are commanding even more. But again, it all depends on where you live too, right? You know, Lance, I don't know what you're the one that pays them, so I mean, you can tell us what your labor costs have.
They are absolutely earning more today than they were 2 to 3 years ago, right? Substantial price difference, and that is very, you know, sorry, I've got a train going by. That from a very, you know, capitalistic perspective, they can demand more because there's a bigger need for housing, and we're trying to fill it, and so there's a higher need for those trades. And I think I was saying it really early in the conversation, and for me, my labor all travels with me. They don't have to if they don't want to anymore, because they can settle down in Dallas or Oklahoma City or Denver and have all the work that they would ever want. And so for them to travel with me, they're commanding much. For them to travel with me, they're commanding much higher prices, and they're much harder to find. But they're also generally less expensive than the cost of the labor in the mountain town. Those guys can demand an even higher wage, right? And not only that, but they're also generally booked up. I mean, if you tried to go find a framer in the Gunnison Valley right now, he would tell you that, you know, he can get you in August of 2022. Other than that, he's booked.
And I think that's the stress that all of our Western Slope communities are feeling, is just plain the shortage of qualified labor and qualified builders to come in and do some of these larger projects for us. And I say larger, and I'm talking 20 units, maybe 30 units. And there's also, well, on top of that, there's also how do you attract maybe developers who have a larger capacity to come into some of our smaller communities and do some of these smaller projects. So if there's anybody that's with us today that has any ideas on how to do that, by all means, throw those ideas out there. In the meantime, I do have another question. Ted, in your slideshow, you had brought up, you didn't really touch on it, so I'm going to ask you about it. But there was a question that you had about, are we borrowing demand from the future? What does that mean?
So a lot of it around lots, right? Are we borrowing demand from the future? Is right. So well, we didn't. Are we building now? I don't know how to articulate this very well, obviously, right now. But it, you know, is the demand that we're seeing now going to stunt the demand that we're going to see on a trajectory, right? You usually see it kind of on a plane. Are we going to see, has it gone up like this, right? And it has to some extent, and then there's going to be a much larger fall or a bigger trough, maybe even a longer trough, because we borrowed demand now from the future. And a lot of that could be around land, right? If we don't have enough land, like we're running out of in some places, at least improved lots, then the costs are going to be so great ultimately for that house that no one can pay for them, right? Our homes getting too expensive now that we're starting to see a chilling effect or demand lessen, because we've reached that point where you know, nobody has the financial means to meet where the market is. So that's a little bit about it. Lance might be a little more articulate from a builder perspective on what that means, but sorry that I keep.
It's kind of a scary thought.
It is.
And I think the big concern of that trough is you lose your trade. So we build up this trade base that can meet the demand, or we get close, and then when we hit the trough, that trade base has to go find another job. We experienced that out of Dallas, Fort Worth, a huge home building area. Was that 06, 07, or no, right? I guess right after the crash, right? 07, 08. And all of a sudden, a lot of the trades either went and found other jobs, or in the Dallas, Fort Worth area, a lot of the trades went home, and their home wasn't in the United States. And so all of a sudden, when it started to ramp back up, your frame, I had a framer that at one point in time had 30 crews. He got down to 2, right? 2 framing crews out of 30. And he was coming up to Oklahoma to frame for me, even though he was out of Dallas, because he was that desperate for work. And then as it started to ramp back up, he couldn't get the teams put back together. And then I guess probably right about the time, maybe when we do, it'll crash again. It's not a good model.
Right. And you probably see this in Oklahoma and North Texas as well, but in Colorado too, we kind of hoped that oil and gas and construction were counter-cyclical, right? Right. Because there's a lot of shared skills within that labor market. So if you saw, oil and gas, plummet, and there were big layoffs there, they would come into housing, right, and vice versa. Well, when housing went down, to Lance's point last time, and Hurricane Harvey played a big role in this, we had a lot of Texas labor as well. And when Harvey hit and they needed to rebuild Houston, I think it was Harvey, if I have my storms right, they fled Colorado and went back home to work because the jobs were there and that's where they were comfortable. That was home. Same thing happens with immigrant labor as well to some extent too. So yeah, what the Great Recession hurt us in a lot of ways, and that we still have not climbed back out of labor, land, just being able to meet demand in general. So that's a little bit of color around what borrowing demand from the future.
Okay. Thank you for talking about that. I think it's an interesting concept, and now that I know of it, that's just one more thing I can lose sleep over at night. So thank you. I'm waiting for people to ask more questions in the chat, so please feel free to do that. In the meantime, I do have a question for both of you from your perspectives, from your various businesses. Is there any expectation of the lending industry modifying its philosophy about its investment into affordable housing? Perhaps I'm naive and feel a little bit like an ostrich with my head in the sand. One, on NIMBYism. I didn't think there was NIMBYism still alive in Colorado, and why would there be? But secondly, the lending industry and banks not being quite so willing to loan to new construction projects or to vacant land for development of affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, Lance, I don't know what your primary sources of capital are. Obviously, we're hoping that institutional lenders come back and they see that it's a less risky, right, play to go finance dirt, if you will, and turn it into new communities. But they've been slow to do that, and I think they got hit hard in the recession, right? And a lot of that was real estate. It was really bad lending practices that was that, and I think they've just moved so far in the other direction. They're so risk averse right now. We have seen that again alleviated. My builders themselves don't report financing issues. I mean, some of the smaller ones do, but it becomes a more pronounced haves and have-nots game, right? When the heavily capitalized people can go out and buy dirt and become their own land developers, and the smaller guys and gals can't. They have to have, they have to have lending. They have to borrow their capital. They're not capitalized. So I don't know. That would be a better question for a banker to answer. But we're hopeful. But Lance may have better insight from having to do it.
I missed a webinar I was supposed to watch today. OFA is our equivalent of Chaffee, right? And they had one talking about CRA and the CRA changes, which is the Congressional Reinvestment Act, and that kind of determines where banks are on lending to LIHTC or affordable housing tax credit developments. And I'm going to speak out of turn. Here's what I'm going to say. There was a pretty big recent change to CRA rules that have affected banks, and the concern from the LIHTC lending world is it's going to decrease the amount of CRA required, which means that banks are not going to be as heavy investors in tax credit developments as they used to be. And I might be getting that wrong. What I'm telling you is that's one that if you're interested in it, you probably need to go Google. I missed the webinar earlier today, so I didn't get all the information. I apologize for that. But it is a concern in the LIHTC world that they're messing with CRA, and CRA was a huge driver in LIHTC pricing. And so it is something to absolutely be tracking. I get all of my funding from regional banks generally. And I will tell you right now that they are calling me like used car salesmen trying to get me to borrow money. I've not seen an issue there. Not generally for raw land. They're more interested in units getting produced. But I have not seen a lending problem yet. Matter of fact, I've seen kind of the opposite. I've seen quite a bit of interest and activity in the LIHTC deals that I've recently been funded. Both from the tax credit syndicators, they're calling, wanting to buy the credit, and from banks calling, wanting to do the lending on it. So that is not a concern that I see today. Now, that market shifts. I won't say monthly, but it shifts quarterly to at least every 6 months.
Thank you. I'm going to go back. There's a question that Amy asked a while ago, and Amy, I apologize for not getting to it sooner, but you had asked if there had been any success in fast tracking projects that create deed restricted or affordable housing units, in essence, giving priority to applications for affordable housing development. Do you see communities embracing changes to how they do business and how they review applications to fast track those types of projects over market rate?
In Colorado, I can tell you there are some that are doing. I can't point to exactly who they are, but that is a conversation. Back to 1271, the House bill that I mentioned, that's sort of part of in that menu or that toolbox, whatever you want to call it, of options the local governments can look to do. But I am hearing more about that local governments are willing to, cut permit times or the fees, streamline the development process for truly, below market rate or whatever you want to call it, affordable housing. So I think that should be successful. I can't point to development X or Y and tell you that, yes, this was done that way. But all practicality and all reason would tell you that should help. If you can help fast track those projects. So
Gunnison County has that written into their code, that they fast track affordable housing projects. And I'm not picking on Gunnison County, but just in general, if that means we take it from an 18-month process to a 1-year process, that's still that's still a lot of time for it. And the problem is you've got two things going on as a developer's perspective. Either I've had to go lay out the money and buy the land and roll my dice and I'm going to be able to get it done. And maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And let me assure you, NIMBY is alive and well in Colorado and Oklahoma. And it won't be because it's affordable housing. There'll be some other kind of great reason, right? But it's NIMBY. That's what it is. And so either the developer, I can go put my money on the table and buy the piece of dirt and hope that I get it done, which is pretty risky. Or I can go ask the landowner to give me an option on the land. And if I get it rezoned, then I can get it done. And that's pretty risky for the landowner. And so the way they mitigate their risk is by raising their price, right? I mean, that's what they do. And I don't blame them, in a fair market, open market system to go, I don't disagree with you. The flip side is if I do get it done and for some reason I don't perform, now you're stuck with zoning that maybe you didn't want, right? And so either I take the risk on myself, and if that's the case, then I need to get compensated for it somehow, or I put the risk on the landowner. If that's the case, I'm going to be compensating them. And so I think that is, and again, not just Colorado, but anywhere, that's a pretty big, that drives costs, and it drives costs pretty substantially. And my experience with it in Colorado, it is quite a bit more difficult to zone and entitle land in Colorado than it is in Oklahoma or Kansas. And so that's going to drive cost, right? I mean, it just is. If you're going to make it more difficult and make it more time consuming, and I'm going to have to hire, I think one time let's say I've done 40 land entitlements in Oklahoma. I've used a lawyer twice, right? I've done the rest of them myself because it's a process, but it's a process that you can follow, and you meet with the city and you get it done. But there's no way I would attempt to do that in Colorado without legal help, right? And that drives cost. And without engineering help up front, right? Normally I entitle my land and then I get my engineer in Oklahoma, but I couldn't do that in Colorado. And I'm not knocking the state, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying, understand that is a difference that you have in Colorado that a lot of other states don't have. And the more money I have to put in it before I know that I'm going to get it entitled, the more risk I'm taking, which means the more reward that I'm going to have to receive, or flip side on the homeowner or the landowner that's trying to do it, the more risk they're taking, that, and they're just going to have to cook that into the price of what they're selling the land for, which eventually is going to get cooked in to the price of what a tenant is paying for rent or a buyer is paying for the price of their home. It's just the way it's going to work. And so that is a big issue.
So am I understanding you in that you're saying that you don't have that issue in Oklahoma, but you do in Colorado? Is that because of the demand that's here? Or is it something that's within our state laws, our codes, just the way we do business? Are there some things in there then that we can change that doesn't make it so costly for you up front, propose a development?
I think that there are things that you could change. I do not think that your beliefs and lifestyle would get you there. In Oklahoma, environmental control, there's no environmental review before you rezone a piece of dirt. There's just not. And in Colorado there is. And I'm not here to judge right or wrong, right? I don't care. But just understand that drives costs, right? Water rights in Oklahoma are not the same as they are in Colorado. And before you can do that, look, I mean, you probably need to get an engineer to make sure that your water the water rights are working properly, right? Drives cost. I'm trying to remember what other things that as I was looking at doing, some development in Gunnison, there were some things that I'd never seen before, right? The sage grouse is over here, and therefore you're going to have to mitigate, and it's going to drive cost. Okay. Again, not wrong.
Thanks for bringing up that topic.
Just difference. And understand that different likes that drives cost, right? And it's a choice that people get to make. But in Kansas where I've done it, and in Oklahoma where I've done it, those costs aren't there. And my cost to develop a lot in Oklahoma is substantially less than it would be in Colorado. It just is.
We often get asked, why can't you build a single family home for $250,000? Well, because in some areas it costs it's $250,000. You're in for $250,000 before you started to build vertically.
I'm selling homes in Guymon, Oklahoma, a 6-hour drive from Gunnison, and my entry home that's going to be about 1,400 square foot will sell for $150,000. 3-2, 2-car garage, brick home, 1,400 square foot, and I will sell that and be profitable for $150,000.
Ouch. So
Yeah.
we have some inherent issues that maybe we can't overcome some of those, but if we can find some other innovative ways to make it less expensive, less litigious, fewer hurdles for developers to overcome, then that's our job to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Or preload it, right? If I came to town and the town said, we've already got this piece, we've already entitled it, we've already cleared it of the environmental issues, right? It's ready to go. And maybe it doesn't have sewer or water, but at least I know, or we've got, it doesn't have the sewer there yet, but we have the engineering done and we know what it's going to cost you. Okay, I can pencil that and I can understand that as part of my deal and figure out if I can make it work or not. But the problem is, if that work hasn't been done up front, then it's a pretty big, it's a big empty box, and I don't know if I can get into it or not. And so it makes me get nervous and probably say, I need to go look at something else where I can be a little more sure.
That makes sense.
And so there are things like that the municipality can do, right? And I don't want to say at no cost, but they sure could do that up front, right? Or help or partner with the state agency to come in and do that environmental. Hey, could you come help us with this? We got a grant that you do that environmental study for us, instead of putting all that on the land developer, right? And then you put that developer in the box. No $600,000 homes here, right? We need you to build this product or something close to it. But because you're going to do that, we did the groundwork for you before you got here, right?
That's a very good takeaway, I think, not only for me, but for a lot of people that are listening to this. Thank you for offering that. I'm going to throw out one more question because it was in the title of this workshop, and seeing that we don't have any others in the chat, this might be the last one. But let's talk about the cost of lumber, why it went up as much as it did, and why it's starting to come back down a little bit.
You want me to start? All right. So there's a number of things at play on why we saw it shoot up. We don't have enough domestic production of timber. Our largest trading partner is Canada. They are 70% of what we import is from Canada. We have pretty good tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber, but it's really, nobody saw the demand that was going to come out during COVID for housing. The mills were shut down for a while. They were not, what was the term we got? They weren't the workforce that could continue, through the pandemic. So they were shut down for a while. They missed demand. They were already missing demand, I think, before the pandemic. They didn't have they had similar labor shortages or labor issues that we had. So there was a pinch point at the mills. It's arguable whether or not they've ramped up demand to where they could have or not so far, because whether or not they enjoy the price of where it is right now. But those are the factors, really the biggest factors at play that saw demand just outshot supply. And when you have that imbalance, you will see those price increases. And why we've seen it start to come down, I believe, unfortunately, is because we've seen builder confidence go down. It's still pretty high, where it's been traditionally, but we've seen that go down. We've seen demand lessen a little bit. So there's been less demand for the product, and that will bring down the price of that commodity. But Lance may have more to that than
No, I think we have a lot of mills in southeastern Oklahoma, and I build a lot down there. And they said the same things. Hey, we shut down for the pandemic. We went to open back up, and our workers wouldn't come back to work. And what that did was that artificially, so we could produce a little bit, and the price started to shoot up. And that wasn't a bad thing for us as a mill. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's kind of what the mills are saying in southeastern Oklahoma. The lumber, I know folks that own timber land, and they were quite perturbed that lumber pricing was that high, and they were not getting any more for their trees. And there was even some look here in Oklahoma. We got pretty rowdy about it because we produced some of that, and we got rowdy about it. The distributor is paying a lot more, and he's passing that on, right? And the tree grower isn't getting paid anymore for the trees. There's only one other person here, and it was, and we kind of pointed to the mills and said, hey, and the mill said, hey, it's a free market.
Yep.
That's true. All right. Any closing words from either of you about things that would entice you to come to, or for Lance, entice you to look at a particular Western Slope community and say, yes, I want to develop there? And Ted, for you representing home builders across the state, where you would say, go to here in Colorado, go here and build, for your closing comments.
Lance, I'll let you lead.
Sure. I think mainly what I said before. Ted gets it. Here's the other one that we don't see a lot. I didn't want to be a developer. I was a home builder, right? I had to become a developer because I wanted to build homes in small towns. And the problem is you get to a lot of small towns, and a small town can't support a guy that's a developer. You can go be a developer in Denver and have 3 or 4 deals going at a given time and make a living, right? But you can't be a developer in a mountain town of 20,000. It doesn't work. And so the mountain towns don't have land developers, right? So you can attract a builder, but finding a guy that's a developer and a builder is more difficult, right? And as Ted said, it takes more capital. It's just more difficult. So yeah, if you're trying to attract builders, waving your hand at the builder and say, I have these lots. They're easy to build on lots. I've already got the tap fees taken care of for you, right? And all you have to do is promise me that you're going to build this size home and rent it for this rent, or this size home and sell it for that rent. But I've made it easy for you, Mr. Builder, come on in. I think that if the town or the housing authority can take that role of developer, I say that like it's simple. It's not, it's more complicated. But the reality is, I hate to say this, when people see me coming as a developer, everything's full retail price. Here's your tap fee. Here's what everything's going to cost. When the wonderful local housing authority goes to the municipality and says, hey, we're trying to get this done and we have the lead as the developer, I think they get more leeway, if you will, on things like impact fees, right? Than the for-profit guy. And I'm not complaining. It's just the way it is. But if you want to track that builder, you take that lead and you get that land ready. And then he just sees, wow, that's an easy deal. I whip in there, I build 20 houses and I get out. The lots are ready to go right now. Streets are in, sewer water's there. Tap fees are paid. Sure. That would be my answer as how do you get a guy.
Right. I just to add a little bit, I can't say it better than Lance just did, but I mean, it's capital, right? Capital is like a river or like any stream. It's going to take the path of least resistance. It will move around, the log in the stream, and it will move right around the rocks in the stream. And if the local governments or whatever or other challenges are putting, are those rocks and those logs, the capital is going to flow right around it and find wherever it's easier to do business. And I don't want easier sounds bad, but you know, where where they feel wanted and it can be done because of all the challenges we've talked about today. I do want to I want to pivot just a little bit because I saw a question on manufactured housing, and if no one's seen the article from May 18th in the Colorado Sun, I look at what Fading West Development's doing, building a, you know, you probably know that pretty well, Jennifer, because you're right next to Chaffee. But I think that is promising. I think that speaks to what Lance was talking about and what you talked about, Jennifer, earlier. That's starting the process where you need the demand, right? And hopefully cutting down on some of the logistics and some of the freight costs and some of that as well. And they can build the modular homes at, you know, hopefully 700 a year, they think, when they reach full capacity and into that, well, into their facilities. So, and if you can build a couple more of those in different areas of Colorado, that might be a way that you can actually, you know, beat some of these challenges and put more product online quicker. But yeah, to your last question, I don't really have anything more to add than what I've added and what Lance has already said. I hope that people understand, hearing Lance talk, that, and you know it because you're in and you live and breathe in the housing industry. Builders and developers and people in the housing industry are very resilient people. They have challenges every day and things that they couldn't have planned for it when they plan, you know, when planning is the name of the game, and they get by and they persevere, and they really do it because they love it and they want to put more people into homes, into housing. They do definitely need to make a profit to do so, or they can't continue. But that's why I love working for, you know, the men and women in this industry every day, because they're just a resilient bunch that just want to solve problems and, you know, help people into the American dream, whether it's home ownership or just, you know, a good home over their head, or roof over their heads. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you both very much. I really appreciate the time that you've taken. Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition and our guests that joined us today are definitely smarter and better informed for your presentation. So thank you for that. To those of you that are still on the workshop with us, I'd like to thank you for attending. Sorry for the little mishap on when it started, but we did have Ted and Lance backtrack. So I got to hear it twice. So now it's really sticking in my brain. Pay attention to your emails. You should get something in July for our next upcoming virtual workshop from Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition. And again, thank you all very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful day.